According to eMark Group, the value of the world lobster market was $6.3 billion in 2021. But they projected that the lobster market growth will be at about 9.94% from 2022 to 2027, bringing the total value to $11.1 billion. That's a lot, considering that lobsters were once regarded as a meal for prisoners, enslaved people, or the poor, or as fertilizer. But what made the lobster a rich man's meal? How did it become so expensive? For today's video, we'll look at the lobster's transformation from the cockroach of the sea to a rich man's meal. But before we get to our video, click the subscribe button if you still haven't. Don't forget to click the notification bell as well, so you're always notified whenever we have a new video. So, let's get right to it. Though lobster and other marine life consumptions can be traced as early as the prehistoric period, it became more popular among Northern Europeans throughout the Viking era. The improvement of boats, the rising cultural investments in ships construction, and the sailors' education led to the lobster's popularity as a food source. However, the crustacean was only available to inland residents because it needed to be prepared within 48 hours of leaving seawater. Therefore, among locals, lobsters became a food more commonly available to the comparatively well-off than fish. And because only the wealthiest could pay to have lobsters delivered from the boat to their kitchen before they went bad, they became known as a symbol of wealth and privilege throughout Europe. Additionally, during that time, religious festivals banned meat consumption. And since marine life and lobster didn't count as meat according to the church, they made a perfect alternative. Then again, there were too many lobsters when the first European immigrants arrived in North America that they allegedly would wash up on the shore in 2-foot-high mounds. In times of famine, their abundance rendered them an invaluable food source, earning them the unfortunate moniker, poor man's protein. To illustrate, Native Americans used lobsters as either fishing bait or fertilizer for their crops. During the colonial era and after that, prisoners, enslaved people, apprentices, and children were frequently fed lobsters because they were so plentiful and very cheap. In Massachusetts, several enslaved people allegedly made agreements that they would only be given lobster twice a week in an effort to avoid eating the crustacean so many times. What amenities do you expect to find in luxurious hotels? Let us know in the comment section below. Back then, lobsters were killed and then cooked, which was the usual practice with all meat products. People were unaware that when lobsters are killed, several enzymatic reactions happen and bacteria breeds within their bodies. Proteolytic enzymes become active after a lobster dies and attack its internal organs. The moment these organs come under attack, another influx of enzymes are released into the lobster's muscle tissue, thus resulting in foul odors, mushy meat, and foul flavors. The embarrassment of eating lobsters was so high that people would covertly hide the shells for fear that others would catch them eating them, leading to lobsters being given the nickname of the cockroaches of the sea. However, over time, lobsters would gradually fight their way back to their previous status as symbols of luxury and privilege. Nicolas Appert, a French inventor and confectioner, created canning as a way to preserve food at the beginning of the 19th century. The procedure of heating food after sealing it in a bottle or jar to sterilize and eradicate any microorganisms. Nicolas' technique was improved upon the following year by an Englishman named Peter Durand, who used tin-coated cans rather than tightly sealed bottles or jars. Then, canning moved to the United States from Europe. Years later, a US cannery built up a lobster pound, and despite some early difficulties, they quickly established a pattern that gave rise to an industry. Who would have thought that the poor man's meal would be an industry that would serve the wealthy? Lobster has indeed come a long way from being mere fertilizer. So railway executives devised a plan to serve lobster to consumers who were unaware of its past. Passengers believed lobster was a rare, expensive delicacy and would even request a lobster dish in restaurants. Around this time, cooks discovered that boiling the crustacean alive was better for the palate. After a short while, the demand for lobster increased, driving the price up and depleting the supply. And this caused overfishing that eventually decimated the lobster stock. Unlike today, overfishing was predominant before because there were no regulations. Understandably, most people could not afford to eat lobster during the Great Depression. Fishermen were under less pressure to gather lobsters, resulting in lower hauls, which helped lobster populations recover. But after the crisis, the lobster population would again be at risk. The Canadian government encouraged individuals to enjoy surplus foods, like a lobster during World War II, to lessen the consumption of ration food. During this time, magazines published recipes for various lobster dishes and declared that eating lobster was patriotic. Meanwhile, the ocean dweller was and is still considered a delicacy in the United States. It became the meal movie stars requested when they went out to eat. The dish the wealthy Rockefellers have during parties, and the dish that noble rich families ordered for their weddings. Lobster is regarded as a delicacy that is slightly less expensive than caviar. And even when availability increases, prices stay high. The logistics involved are one of the causes. Utilizing bait and drop-down traps, fishermen collect lobsters in the ocean. The fishermen may not necessarily be fortunate if the traps are ultimately filled. Due to regulations, they frequently have to return a lot of lobsters to the ocean. On the other hand, the lobsters that will be brought back to shore will have their claws bound. They must then be maintained in saltwater tanks so they can stay alive. Additionally, they must be kept cool, moist, and with enough oxygen during shipping. The lengthy process raises the cost of selling them to consumers. The preservation of lobster's status as a luxury food is another factor in its high price. Studies show that consumers frequently believe there is a correlation between price and quality, and some enjoy more expensive goods. Additionally, customers are often wary of inexpensive goods because of the belief in the correlation that high-quality products should be costly. Therefore, many restaurants would prefer to keep the pricing high for lobster, even when the wholesale price has decreased in order to maintain its luxurious image. Still, the other menu items appear more affordable than lobster dishes. Customers might even be aware of everything, but they seldom care and are happy enough to eat some lobster. Recently, reports say that there may soon be a lobster shortage. The reason for this is because of overfishing herring and mackerel. These types of fish are commonly used as crustacean bait, and they are getting depleted over time. So the U.S. New England Fishery Management Council has instructed fisheries to catch roughly 77% fewer pounds of herring than in prior years. And in Canada, the Fisheries and Oceans Department went so far as to shut down the herring and mackerel fisheries. Typically, one fishing boat uses 500 pounds of bait daily. And some places have seen increases in bait prices of up to 50 cents per pound. In addition to these difficulties, some nations have started to outlaw boiling live lobsters. Activists have contended that it is cruel to boil lobsters alive. In spite of that, a researcher disagrees and argues that there is not much evidence that lobsters' brains can perceive pain. Furthermore, although stunning lobsters before boiling is permitted in some nations like Switzerland, the equipment needed for the operation can cost thousands of dollars. If this is the case, it wouldn't be too far-fetched that the prices for lobster dinners would increase soon. And that is the history of one of the most expensive dishes in the world. But before you go on to our next video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel by clicking the red button. Click the notification bell so you'll be notified whenever we release a new video. See you in our next video, and always remember, Invictus Luxury, for people who want more.